You're listening to the Global Ood Podcast, where every week we learn about the world through the eyes of entrepreneurship with your host, Ujwal Veligapudi.
So I've been looking to live in various cities around the country and world for a few months at a time so I can explore different areas and experience new settings. A bit more than a getaway weekend, but less hassle than signing a long-term lease. I know it's a tough time to be doing something like that, especially in 2020, but one company that I found to make that process a breeze is doing just that. Spotahome is reinventing the rental process by making it easier for landlords and renters to connect with their digital platform. Founded by Alejandro Artacho in Madrid, Spain in 2014, they've already grown to over 10 cities across Europe and raised well in excess of 80 million euros from some of the top investors in the world, like Kleiner Perkins and the founders of unicorn giants Dropbox, Yelp, and Uber. You'll love Alejandro's enthusiasm and energy.
Yeah, so Spotahome is an online booking platform for mid to long-term rentals. So it can be anything for a few months to few years. And the whole point is that the rental experience end-to-end is fully digital and online. So starting, for example, you can do a rental for a year or 2 years without seeing the house in person. And then you can manage your contracts entirely online. Everything happens through the app or through your panel on desktop. And now we are getting into payments. And so the whole idea is that you can manage your entire rental. And then basically everything that it was done offline through more like traditional agents, then we're replacing that through self-service products, basically.
So you mentioned everything is digital. So how are you integrating the landlord and the renter exactly? Like who's actually your consumer and who's the one paying for your service? Is it the landlord or is it the renter?
Yeah, so it's actually both. So both of them are paying, and from the landlord side. So on the landlord side, we work both with private owners, and then we also work with property management companies. Now we're working with banks, big funds and real estate assets. Big ones around the world in the 8 countries that we are operating now. And then, so those are one of the paying customers. And then on the other side, we have tenants. And then for tenants, it's very simple. It would be like booking a hotel or an accommodation for short term, but then similar process to long term. And then on both sides, actually, we have more tools for landlords. And if you think of property managers or big asset managers, that they are like managing tens of thousands of properties. And sometimes it can be in one country or it could be in several countries at once. Then it's very difficult for them to manage all their properties and see all the rentals or the tenants, who are paying, who is not paying. And then take into account that they got to manage visits. And sometimes they spend a lot more time scheduling visits. And to schedule the visits and get those leads, they got to go to multiple classifieds and traditional classifieds. You are in US, you guys have, Craigslist or Zillow, and then so they get all these leads, they schedule the visits, then those visits, they can end on rentals or not. And then once the rental and the application happens, then usually there is a lot of manual work, and then they got to go with papers. And you guys in US, it's more digitized, I would say, the applications, but that is not happening in other countries. And in Europe, it doesn't happen. And then if you look at places in LATAM or Asia, it doesn't happen. Usually it's a lot of paperwork and you got to be doing things on the phone and meeting in person. All those things takes a bunch of time for both sides, right? So basically with us in your platform as a landlord, independently of the number of properties that you have, you can see everything in one single place, and you can have full visibility, and you only do a visit or allow a visit once to what we call the home checkers, which they go to the properties and do the videos, 360 floor plans, they do all the materials, and then you never have to do a visit or allow a visit again. And then you just start receiving bookings for the rest of the lifetime of the property, unless something changes in the property, and then we got to go again. And then once that happened, then you have entire visibility of all your rentals, tenants, check-ins, check-outs, the entire thing, right? So it's also kind of a property management tool for landlords. And then for tenants, it's super easy. You know, like when we launched in Spain, one thing that you know, it wasn't on purpose and we were not chasing, but then we saw that we had an amazing fit for international tenants, and those are people that they were not in the city. So those guys, they couldn't see the property in person by nature, right? Because they weren't there. So we were the only tool when we launched in Spain by which you could actually rent a property without being physically in the country. And then actually you could do that in your local language in a foreign country. So that's why we got the first booking in less than 2 hours when we launched in March 2014. And it was a Japanese customer booking for a year and a half in Madrid when we only had 9 properties listed on the site. So for tenants, you save a bunch of time and therefore money, you know. And in a time like now with COVID that you can't really travel and there are all these restrictions on traveling, then, you know, it makes a lot more sense that there is a digital product that you don't need, you know, that you can do everything online starting from viewings.
So for a few months, I've been planning on leaving the US actually to live abroad, and was looking towards Mexico in specific, since it's one of the few countries that doesn't have any travel restrictions right now. So I was looking for the mid to long-term range, you know, 2, 3, 4 months. And previously when booking an Airbnb or a hotel, I'd always worry about how big it really is, how clean it is, because, you know, the pictures are always prettier than the reality. But when I was on your application on Spotahome, you could understand and really envision yourself with the visual aspects of the video tour, the floor plan, and additional piece of information that you guys share with the renter. So, I mean, this really helps versus, let's say, a traditional site, because they usually just make it seem like it's much bigger or much more elegant than it truly is. So from the landlord perspective, I used to have a few dozen rentals. So how does that work exactly in terms of the interaction with the tenants going in and out? Like, do I give you my key or my code box, and then your team handles all the tenant inflow and outflow? Or is there no physical checking of the property again? It's either fully online and you either get it or you just don't.
Yeah, not yet. So as it works today, you control the check-in yourself. So basically what we are sending you is the closed bookings. So you receive, because also you have the control to accept or reject in the tenants that you want. And then we do credit checks for you and whatever you need to accept a tenant. So I know in US, you guys usually ask for a bunch of information from the tenant, and you have that tenant vetting. In other countries, it's not that severe, kind of. It's easier, and landlords, they are more relaxed in that way. But then, as we're operating in 8 countries in Europe, and then different countries, they have different ways to operate. So in some countries like Germany, France, also in UK, landlords, they ask for a bunch of information. So all that information is given to you for you to have an informed decision, because it may be that you get 3 paid requests with different length of stays, and then you have all the information from the tenants, and then we allow you to just make the choice and to accept or reject the tenants that you want. And once that happens, then you just receive the contracts directly, and then it could be either a contract that you're comfortable with, but many landlords, they don't have contracts or they don't have that legal background. So we give them the contracts, and it's automatically fill in, then all the signatures that are happening online. And then after that, then all the communication happens through our platform, and then you coordinate the check-in with the tenant as you have the keys. Then that is a step that we want to move in to, and then stepping in more phases of the kind of the journey, the rental journey. That's the mission that we are after.
So you're saying that eventually you do want to offer like you're saying with the background check, the legal contracts, things like that, like you slowly want to encompass the full end-to-end service of being a full-on property management company down the road, or is that not something that you guys are going for?
From a landlord perspective, being able to be fully hands-off and then just having visibility and control over the entire journey. But this is a step by step, right? In kind of digitizing the entire journey, and basically we're analyzing everything that happens offline, map that out, and then start building digital products for each of the phases of the process, right? But it's one step at a time.
Yeah, especially the meat of it during the tenant operations and handling the property management aspect. I'm sure it can get pretty difficult. And especially as you're doing it in all of these different countries, I'm sure your legal team and your legal affairs team must be extremely large because there's so many nuances. I mean, for example, I'm a licensed agent within the state of Michigan. And when I moved to another state and to Texas, I wasn't able to operate anymore. So I'm sure with your particular country that you're operating in your territory, your provinces or states, it's going to be such a unique situation for each. And so for every single country that you're going to come across those regulations and those situations every single time. So how difficult has that been in terms of the legal aspect of your tenant laws, your landlord laws, your rental laws?
That's a good question. Yeah, it's difficult, especially in Europe. I wasn't aware that in US between different states there were such different regulations, but then in Europe definitely they are. And yeah, you're right. Actually, for the first 4 years of the company, we were running centrally, everything from Madrid, everyone from Madrid. And then we had people from the different countries, but then based in Madrid. What we saw is that because all the local nuances, as we were expanding, it was much better to have local teams on the ground, including legal, and then being close to those regulations. And then, I would say that maybe 80% of the entire operations are the same everywhere. And then you have that 20% that you need to adapt. So that is not only from operations. I think the challenge then is on product roadmaps and then justifying, development for local operations from a product perspective that are going to distract you from the general overall product that serves for that 80%, right? So sometimes you got to do trade-offs as well, but that I would say that is the difficulty, seeing what is the opportunity cost, for something, because also we think of the world. Now we are at 8 countries. At a point we were in 17 countries, but then we decided to just fully focus on 8. And but we want to go to 190 countries, all over the world. So you got to balance those resources. I'm thinking on large scale versus local nuances.
So can you go a little bit more into that? I mean, what was your thought process when you were in those 17 countries, and then what was that ultimate decision or mindset to scale it back down to 8? Because that must have been such a tough move. Huge transition to actually get there and then to go all the way back.
So we look at the business more on a city by city model. So we were in 33 cities, 17 countries versus 11 now. And what happened is that we scale up to 33 cities very quickly. And then it's very easy to, one, get distracted. Second, spreading too thin. And in a marketplace like ours, you need, and any marketplace, you need a bunch of, you need that liquidity on the supply side, and especially for long-term rentals, it's a big decision. It's not the same going, for a weekend somewhere, and then maybe you have fewer options, but you're just going there and you're going to spend 2 or 3 days. In a place here, you're going to be spending 1 year, right? So in order to make that decision, comparatively, you got to see a bunch of more properties to just make the decision. And the decision is much tougher than in holiday rentals. So what we saw is that in order to increase your conversion rates, it was better to focus all your strength in fewer places, build that liquidity, that rather than spread it too thin and not having enough properties in a bunch of places. That would be that was kind of not having business, right? And those cities that were growing, but then, as always, you got to manage your resources. And either you put everything in 11 places or you put everything in 33. Obviously, you're going to be smaller in 33 rather than bigger in 11. So that's the route that we chose.
Yeah, and when you mentioned managing resources, there's a couple of elements to that, right? Your talent pool and your overall company's liquidity, right? So when you guys started way back in 2014, can you walk us through the various stages of funding that you guys have gone through? I mean, was it bootstrapped completely by you and your co-founders early on, or how did that start, and where exactly are we today?
Yeah, so we started, and before I go, one thing to your previous question is also when you are spreading to things and you don't have that liquidity, it affects your unit economics. When you concentrate more your marketplace, it improves your margins as well. So that was one of the drivers for the decision. Now to this question. So we started in 2014. We started 4 friends, and when we started, and actually the first co-founder that joined me, Brian, he and I were doing another startup before, and I called him one day and I said, "Hey Brian, walk in the street for 1 hour and count how many travel agencies do you see in the high street?" And he said, "Well, none, right? Or close to zero." And 20 years ago, it used to be full, and you would go to these travel agencies to do everything, right? And to get your trips set up. And then I said, "Do that again and count how many offices of real estate agents do you see in the high street?" And the answer would be many. And I said, "I think we can help these guys out to streamline their operations and to not need physical offices to actually operate. And I think we can digitize all this." So Brian joined me. Then we got 2 more co-founders, and the 4 of us, we launched in March 2014. Then we did a family and friends of 125,000 euros because we started getting bookings since the first day. Then we got an investor in UK, although we started the company in Madrid, but the first investor in Trivago, and now they have for many years now, VC, they are called Houseat. They're based in London. Like a month after operations and after 37 emails or so, and being a pain in the ass, he committed an investment, and he's an incredible investor. David Soskins is his name. So then that started to create some momentum, and then we got family and friends, 125,000. Also, David said, for us to close a round, you need a lead investor in Spain. So I started a quest in 2014 to get our first funding round in Spain with a lead investor. And that I found it really tough back in the days. Many things changed in the Spanish ecosystem, but back then, the number of investors and the appetite for investment and risk aversion, they were way different as of today. And it was really tough to get your first funding, especially being so young. So in September that year, I asked David and I said, David, man, like, the Spanish offers that we're getting are too expensive for us. Some of the offers go for 50% of the company for tiny amounts. So then David introduced me a group of business angels in London. And, funny enough, like after 4 months and trying to raise in Spain, then, in 24 hours, we got a term sheet from, these guys in London. So we closed that round, and that was another 225,000. And then a few months later, we closed 750,000. And this was already June 2015, and it was a VC Passion Capital from London. Then the next year in April, we raised another 4.7 million in a Series A1, we call it, and that it was actually a VC in Spain. And then we started to add a lot more investors from all over Europe and a bunch of business angels, actually. Then a year after, we raised another 13.7 million euros. And then we added like incredible people into, and I got obsessed about bringing smart people, bringing entrepreneurs, really, these investors that have been on operations, and they have been founders, or they have been executives, and they really know what it takes to build a company. And that's the major difference that I've seen in investors. Because building companies are not spreadsheets. It's a lot more that it goes behind them. So yeah. And then in 2018, then is when we did a major leap in investment, and we closed a Series B led by Kleiner Perkins. That was $40 million round. And it was actually the first time a top tier VC from Silicon Valley ever invested in Spain. So that made the entire team super proud. And we made kind of history there in Spain. And then, from that round, and then, with Kleiner, a lot of entrepreneurs and incredible people also joined us. And then, yeah, we raised another, but it's not around, but we raised more capital actually at the beginning of this year. So we were preparing for Series C, and then we got COVID, and COVID is affecting travel, like most of the companies in the world. Then we had to do some changes, which actually made us much stronger today. So overall, we have raised over 80 million euros. I forgot also some extra funding that we got to buy a company in 2018. So yeah, overall, it's over 80 million euros raised.
And so you started in Spain, then went to the UK to raise, and kind of back and forth with various investors. For Kleiner, for example, was that something that you were seeking out? Because you said you wanted smart people on your team. So, and the right type of investor. So was that something that you sought to go to Silicon Valley and raise there versus, let's say, within your own backyard in the European region?
Yeah, so I was looking and thinking, kind of I work backwards. I was thinking, what is the cap table that we want to have in 5 years? And then as we're going to scale internationally, what I realized is that 80% of our cap table back then, it was European based, from all over Europe. And then we had the other 20% actually was from US. And then from US, we had, some funds, and we had business angels. But then, I got obsessed about doing a Series B from a fund that would have a lot of experience. Kleiner Perkins, it's one of the oldest firms in the world, right? So getting that, it was kind of an obsession. It was, and then I didn't. It was a time, I think it was September 2017, and my co-founders and I, we went to San Francisco, and I went to meet some of our angels that we had there, and we wanted to meet some entrepreneurs there and some of the companies, and we spent a week there. It really was a retreat week. That we wanted to get ideas. We wanted to see, how things were working in Silicon Valley. And then, our investors there, they introduced us, some investors, and then we were not raising. But then, we saw all the funds in Silicon Valley asking, where were we going to raise? And then I told my co-founders, I think we can raise our Series B from here. And so, a few months later, everything started. But it wasn't like, at that point, I was like, yeah, let's do it. From I think if we get a firm like Kleiner Perkins, they're going to open a lot of doors for us, which happened, right? But then, as I think in the future, I'm thinking on Asia, I'm thinking, Middle East, and combining more funds and network around the world. This is a people business. It comes a lot through connections and opening up the network and seeing different ideas, different entrepreneurs, and really opening up. So
on the people aspect, one of those investors is Travis Kalanick, right? The co-founder and former CEO of Uber. So can you talk about that, and how was that something also that you sought out because of his particular expertise, and also the type of influence that he may or may not have brought to Spotahome?
Yeah, so these were also, Kleiner, and he brought a lot of connections. When the Series B, we raised them in 2018. One of the things, so there were primarily two major things that I wanted to do with the business, and the main one was localizing operations way better. I think Uber is an example of that, and going super hyper local in their operations, and that made them one of the fastest companies ever in the world, and I was super intrigued to see how they did it. And actually, we hired a bunch of people from Uber, and directors back in the days, and people that they were running operations for multiple countries, and lots of good. Yeah, so it's actually both. So both of them are paying, and from the landlord side. So on the landlord side, we work both with private owners, and then we also work with property management companies. Now we're
so when you're scaling
banks,
like that, on the opposite
funds,
side of the investors is going to be your own
real
team,
estate assets,
right? That you're needing to scale
big
as you
ones
scale your
around the world,
operations to
in
other
the 8
countries.
countries that we are operating
So
now. And then
you said that you
those
want
are
to
one
get
of the paying
into every
customers.
part of
And
the
then on the
world.
other
So
side,
let's
we
say
have
you
tenants,
do
and then
want
for
to at some
tenants, it's very
point
simple. It would be like
expand into Asia. How does
booking a
that look like
hotel or
exactly?
an accommodation
Like,
for
how
short
do you
term,
even
but then
plan for
similar
something like
process
that in
to
terms of
long term.
the network
And
that
then
you're
on both
talking
sides,
about?
actually, we
Do
have
you raise
more
money
tools for
there
landlords.
first
If you
and
think
then
of a
build out
property
your operations, or
managers
do you hire
or
a
big
great executive team
asset
from there to lead that
managers
charge?
that they are
Or
like managing
how does
tens
that
of
work when
thousands
you're
of
looking to expand into a
properties.
completely brand new
And
region?
sometimes it can be in one country, or it could be in several countries at once. Then it's very difficult for them to manage all their properties and see all the rentals or the tenants, who are paying, who is not paying, and then take into account that they got to manage visits. And sometimes they spend a lot more time scheduling visits. And to schedule the visits and get those leads, they got to go to multiple classifieds and traditional classifieds. You are in US, you guys have Craigslist or Zillow, and then so they get all these leads, they schedule the visits, then those visits, they can end on rentals or not. And then once the rental and the application happens, then usually there is a lot of manual work, and then they got to go with papers. And you guys in US, it's more digitized, I would say, the applications, but that is not happening in other countries. And in Europe, it doesn't happen. And then if you look at places in Latam or Asia, it doesn't happen. Usually it's a lot of paperwork, and you got to be doing things on the phone and meeting in person. All those things takes a bunch of time for both sides, right? So basically with us, in your platform as a landlord, independently of the number of properties that you have, you can see everything in one single place, and you can have full visibility, and you only do a visit or allow a visit once to what we call the home checkers, which they go to the properties and do the videos, 360 floor plans, they do all the materials, and then you never have to do a visit or allow a visit again. And then you just start receiving bookings for the rest of the lifetime of the property, unless something changes in the property, and then we got to go again. And then once that happens, then you have entire visibility of all your rentals, tenants, check-ins, check-outs, the entire thing, right? So it's also kind of a property management tool for landlords. And then for tenants, it's super easy. Like when we launched in Spain, one thing that it wasn't on purpose and we were not chasing, but then we saw that we had an amazing fit for international tenants, and those are people that they were not in the city. So those guys, they couldn't see the property in person by nature, right? Because they weren't there. So we were the only tool when we launched in Spain by which you could actually rent a property without being physically in the country. And then actually you could do that in your local language in a foreign country. So that's why we got the first booking in less than 2 hours when we launched in March 2014. And it was a Japanese customer booking for a year and a half in Madrid when we only had 9 properties listed on the site. So for tenancies, you save a bunch of time and therefore money, and in a time like now with COVID that you can't really travel, and there are all these restrictions on traveling, then it makes a lot more sense that there is a digital product that you don't need, that you can do everything online starting from viewings.
That's so interesting about your model with the entrepreneurs in an independent location. So, can you get a little bit more into that? Let's say there's an audience member listening in a country in Asia right now, and they say they want to try this out in my city. How would that work at that local level? I mean, do they approach you and say, hey, we want to try this out? I know maybe an apartment complex or a few apartment complex owners. I'll go do the tours, do all the videos, and utilize your platform to really showcase the units, and I will generate the interest within the local market myself and actually create and build out that ecosystem so that Spotahome can further invest in more resources there. And is that kind of how it works?
Yeah, so actually we get those requests from everywhere constantly. And actually my favorite requests are the ones coming from our tenants. Let's say, for example, someone from Singapore rents in London, for a year, and then before they're going to move out and go back to their countries, they would come to us and say, "Man, I love this product. Are you guys in Singapore? I can launch this thing for you guys." We haven't done that yet. And the reason is what I was explaining before, of concentrating, getting the model right, and iterating and improving the model in the places that we are. But actually, what you mentioned is one of the ideas. But also, you got to do a recruitment. It cannot be, although for choosing those people, we value very highly, people that they have tried out their own companies before. We found that those are the best general managers, and we love that. Actually, we love the stories of, I tried this, but it failed, but I learned this, because you need that energy and you need those ideas. But also, if you have some experience as well, and that is also a plus. So yeah, you gave me, we thought about that model, and then now we are thinking on different models to actually expand. But the way that we haven't done it until now is being intentional, and it's being, okay, we're going to launch in France. We're going to get a GM in Paris, and then from Paris, we're going to be expanding. And it's being more intentional. But it has the potential to be more inbound kind of as per request. But for that, you need funding. And it's very easy, at the beginning when you launch in a new city, it's going to burn money, right? So you can open up tomorrow to 200 entrepreneurs, highly energetic, that they want to launch their business everywhere in the world. That will consume every dollar that we have.
And so about your team and scaling, how many people are on your team today, and where are they located for the most part geographically?
So actually, to a point, it's been when we started, we got to a point that we were 400 people, but also there was a lot of manual processes. So we were like growth at all costs, and then as we have been developing automations and technology, then actually, while we grow in volume, we have been scaling down the teams. And I've seen this in many companies. It's like, okay, now you grow, and then you put people actually doing the tasks, and then you just automatize. And then after COVID, we did some restructure as most of the companies. So actually now we have over 100 people, and then now actually we're kind of we got a hit on COVID, and now we're recovering faster. So then we'll scale up again from that. But by year 4, I think we were 400 people.
Oh wow, 400. And for the most part, is everybody in Spain, or do you have offices throughout Europe?
Yeah. So pre-COVID, we were 50-50. So 50% in Spain, because a lot of Central teams that were already in Spain, and then the other 50 across Europe. And now it got to be around 75 to 80% is in Spain, and the remaining is in Europe. And then we have local teams in every single country now, but now everyone is on remote anyway. So
you were talking about when you're actually trying to raise money back in 2014, and within Spain, it was so difficult, right? At that point, which seems like a very long time ago, but it was just a few years ago. So what was that mindset that most investors had back then? I mean, were they just not used to the startups, deploying funds for startups and that entire valuation system? Like you said, they wanted way too much equity, or was it more of the mindset and the investment model? And how has that shifted today for somebody, let's say in Europe or specifically in Madrid, looking to raise funding or raise capital?
Yeah, I think back in 2014, there were not that many examples of successful startups in Spain. Up to that date, there were not that many exits in Spain, and I feel there was also more offer of investors rather than demand. So I saw a lot of power on the investor side, as they were not. But that changed. I think in the last years, more and more entrepreneurs have been coming, but also more and more exits have been in the market. And it may not only be Spanish companies and being only operating in Spain, but then we had in recent years more examples of Spanish-born companies being international, and then having international players buying those companies. So I think investors also realized that they can potentially be bigger upsides, and for that, better to have smaller equity stake on a much larger company rather than a bigger stake in a smaller company, and then some new players on the investor side came in with a more with a kind of a riskier mindset, or more open for bigger upsides, and then those investors actually started to take more a bigger piece of the cake, and then some of those investors now, they have a stake in the most valuable tech startups in Spain, and so I think that rushed the investment community in Spain. But also for there is this organization, Spain Startup. They do an event called South Summit. They started out, I think, in 2013 or 14, and it's an event once a year. And each year is bringing better and better international people, and it's the most international event that we have here, and it's one of the largest tech events in the south of Europe. And I think that changed a bunch of things, and I think it put Spain kind of in the side of international investors. Up until 5 years ago or 4 years ago, international investors, they were not really investing much in Spain. We were kind of hidden from the marketplace, right? But now we open up.
That is interesting. So in the past few years, as that's changed, how has your network and your, more specifically, your peer network changed? So when you started off, it was you and your buddies as co-founders, and now you're leading the charge with a few hundred team members. So throughout that process, I'm sure you've got great investors along the way, great angels, great VCs, and very large investors around the world. So, but as far as the mentorship, as far as somebody to lean on and say, hey, you're a founder of another company, here's my issues, can we talk about this? Do you have your own group or network that you can rely on, lean on throughout this entire process? And do you typically utilize some sort of peer network like that?
Yeah, absolutely, a lot. And like building the network is tough. You got to dedicate a lot of hours and a lot of energy into that, but it truly pays off. And as I mentioned before, this is a people business, and And I have spent a lot of time on network building. And as you say at the beginning, it was four of us. Nobody knew us, and then I started to just talk with more people. And then you got to get out there and you got to move, right? And also at a point, I got obsessed by bringing smart people. And the reason is because in 2015. We made a mistake, and it's one of the mistakes that I regret the most back in the days. So it was in 2015, we got around, and then we wanted a higher valuation than the one that we got at the end. And then, slightly higher. It was a very ambitious valuation. So actually, in hindsight, it was a good valuation that we got back then. But as part of that round, I had the opportunity to bring super smart investors from US actually back in the day. So it was like a year old, and then these investors, they were not investing much in Europe or Spain. So it was a good opportunity for us, and we didn't take their money because we were going to get more diluted. And in hindsight, that is the dumbest thing you can do, right? And then when we went out in 2016 to raise capital, then I missed not having accepted their capital, because then you realize that for every door you open, you have potentially 10 other doors that you can open, and it's just it's a network, right? So then I was like, yeah, if we got those guys, then it would have been easier to raise our round in 2016, but also you have a lot more expertise next to you, helping you out in how you position that round and everything. I mean, your business plan, everything that you can imagine. So then from that point, I was like, okay, from now on, I'm going to take the opposite strategy. So every smart person that I meet, if we're raising, I'm going to invite them in. And now today we have more than 8 investors. And it got to a point that I was like meeting these incredible people that I'm so fortunate to have in our cap table, and it would be like having a coffee, asking them for advice, seeing the connection, and I would go and say, look, do you want to invest? We'll make a space in this round, and I'll make it happen, right? So many of these investors joined out of a coffee, and that it becomes very handy, right? And with some of these investors, I have a very close relationship, and it would be like, almost talking on a everyday basis. And then what you realize is that you are not alone, all the opposite. And I would say 95% of the things that happens to you, and it's not from a business perspective, I would say more that is from an emotional perspective. All of them went through it, because at the end, we're all humans. And these businesses are run as of today by humans. Maybe in 20 years time, we are not needed anymore. And that is those sanity checks. It changed everything, because man, entrepreneurship was easy. Everyone would do it, right? So it's tough, man. It's a tough job.
Alejandro, I love your mindset and your thought process around that. It's because it's really not about the money or the dilution at that point, right? It's really more about what they can bring to the table and how you're going to learn from what doors that they're actually going to be able to open for your team.
And I see that is a common mistake from entrepreneurs, and especially if it's first time. They worry too much about dilution, but if you want to build a massive business, I think you should relax on that more and think of what you bring on the table.
So when you started in 2014, what did you have envisioned? What was that exit back then? And how has that changed since that point? And what is your current end goal for Spotahome?
Yeah, so look, I think the easiest way to look at it is what I was mentioning before about travel. If you think about transportation, accommodation, and activities, there are many digital products that you have today, and you can do anything, right? If you were thinking about traveling to Europe, leaving tomorrow and spending a few weeks, then you have multiple products that are going to help you throughout the journey, right? And before, you had to do that physically, going to an office and arranging your entire trip, right? if you think about rentals, if you think about buying and selling houses, property management, it's pretty similar to what was happening to travel, and so our end game kind of is, if you manage to rent houses from a device end to end and be able to do everything, without talking on the phone with anybody, fully self-service, having full control. If you manage to buy and selling houses entirely online, if you can manage your property, all those things in one single place, then that would be amazing, right? And if you could do that everywhere in the world, and I think that is what is heading. And and there are multiple. I think that is a common vision shared, and there are multiple strategies and action plans. And then, many people, they don't believe it's going to be possible. But then, when we started in 2014, I remember everyone telling me nobody's going to rent a house for a year without seeing the house in person, right? And that is happening. And then, some of the products that we're testing today that unfortunately I cannot share with you, but then some of the tests that we're doing are things that people said that nobody would do. But then you just go and say, well, people are actually doing it. Right? So, yeah, and it's the same if you think about 10 years ago or 15 years ago, if you wanted to buy a T-shirt or your shoes, everyone would say, why don't you go to a store and just test them out and buy them, right? And now it's kind of insane when you see people going to stores, right? So I think in real estate is going to be similar.
Yeah, that would be amazing, honestly, especially from my perspective on the U.S. market. Even as a consumer who's looking to move abroad for a few months, I'm not going to be looking at this place until I actually arrive there and knock on the door. And so that consumer and mindset shift is really going to be amazing to see. And companies like Spotahome that are bringing that to the forefront, highlighting it and enabling the consumer to be able to do that. That's pretty amazing.
It's a long journey. It's a big vision.
Thank you so much again, Alejandro. I really love your enthusiasm and passion for how your journey has come across over these past 6 years, from your team standpoint, your investors, operations, and I'm honestly pretty excited to see where you guys are in a few years and your journey from here on out.
Thanks, man. Thank you for the interview.
And if somebody wants to check out Spotahome, where would someone be able to find you?
So it's spotahome.com, and then we have Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and then so we are in all different platforms. And we have iOS, Android, everything. And
hopefully coming to a city wherever our audience members are. Thank you.
Exactly. Next time we talk, we're going to be in many more countries.
Thank you so much for listening to the show this week. Please do leave a comment on your thoughts about today's episode, and make sure to hit subscribe to get the latest on the Global Ooge. Or if you already have, please share with a friend that you think might enjoy.